Hi, welcome to Tea with Potluck. This is a not your usual cannabis podcast because we're not going to talk about anything really that important or political or anything to really rile you up, but we're just going to talk about us, which mostly what podcasts are about anyways, is just talking about ourselves. So today on my second episode, I have Lulu Tsui here and I have Steven Jung. And I'd like to also thank the Bluntness first while we're here before hosting. And what I would like to do is introduce Lulu first, and then we'll go to Steven. So Lulu, tell me, besides me knowing you for a few years, oh my gosh, do we count COVID? But just meeting you and your amazing aura and just how you bring the community together and me and everyone else. So Lulu, tell us about you.
So first of all, pleasure to be here. One of the reasons I come to LA is because of this lady. I call her my fairy god mentor, I would say, because Ophelia is everything magical about plant medicine. So I'm very honored to be here for your second episode. My name is Lulu Tsui. I am co-founder and chief experience officer for On the Revel, a New York-based education platform. I'd say I started my cannabis journey as soon as my parents landed in Eugene, Oregon with me, because the folks that raised us and raised me and helped us acclimate and taught us English and babysat me were all legacy cannabis growers and, the hippie healers. So I'm part of hippie legacy, and that has just been part of my life since I was 5 years old. Went into the legal cannabis game in Washington State in about 2016 with a group called Root Sciences on the extraction, post-processing, manufacturing, processing side of the house. And in 2016 started On the Revel because my partner Jacoby and I really thought that when New York comes online, it's going to be a game changer. So we've been hosting events just to bring community together, to bring people who are interested in the supply chain, pretty much all the legal opportunities for legal cannabis. That's what we do in New York.
That's just, we're going to get back into more, but that's not just what you do. Now we go to our heartthrob of the day. I'm telling you, we need a calendar. Like every month should be Steven doing something. Skiing, walking a dog, eating, having fun. So tell us about you.
Firstly, I love what both of you are doing, Ophelia and Lulu, and so I'm honored to be here with you. So thank you for having me. As far as my journey into cannabis is concerned, I'd like to say that I've been really lucky in that cannabis found me. But in order to kind of get to that part of the story, I'll back up a little bit and start from earlier in my life. So I, grew up in Los Angeles, California native. I ended up leaving and going to the East Coast for school. I went to West Point for undergrad, and when I graduated, I was commissioned as an infantry officer in the United States Army. And so I like to say I was destined for weed at that point in time. But throughout my career, I would describe it mostly as confused, but definitely a situation where you can connect the dots looking backward. And so after I got out of the Army, did that for 5 years, I got out, did management consulting for a bit, went into finance for a bit, got into startups, and eventually got to Silicon Valley. I worked for Twitter in the earlier days, a couple startups after that, backed by Google. And then along the way, Weedmap showed up and asked if I was interested to join. I think, like I mentioned, I was blessed to be found by the plant and the industry. I did not have a connection with it, really. I didn't have an understanding of it. And so it started my journey of just doing the homework and understanding why this was so significant and so important. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but obviously an incredible opportunity to be a part of changing the world and making it better. And so for me, that's always been something that I cared about in my career, is having a lifetime of service. And so whether it was my time in the military or now even the time here in cannabis, I think we have this amazing chance to really make the world a better place. And so that's really exciting. And that's what we're doing now at PAX. And I think we have some exciting things to talk about because the company had the history, obviously, in terms of all the innovation and the quality through the device technology that it created. And along the way, really what we're doing now is transforming it into a cannabis company with our own products. And that's really been what I've been focused on since I joined.
Wow. I'm going to ask you a question because of your experience with cannabis really started with weed maps. But however, as a veteran, did you, now looking back, how do you see how you or PAX can help veterans with the plant?
Veteran access is incredibly important in an area that doesn't get, I think, enough focus or attention from the right people at the moment. So there's a lot of opportunities, some really great organizations out there like Baja and Weed for Warriors that are on the forefront really trying to create advocacy for veterans. And in terms of what we can do and what matters to me around that, first and foremost, it's access. And access really comes in two forms. And this is also true just generally of all people, by the way, getting them access. And so the first point of access is going to be through licensing and allowing legalization so that markets can open up, which means that geographically you'd even have the chance to go and purchase it legally. And then the second form of access is financially. And because cannabis is still federally illegal, it means that for anyone that's in the VA program, they don't get any subsidy in order to purchase the product that they need, which again, like anybody else, right? If you look at the studies, it is almost 90% of people, certainly well above 80% of people that use cannabis to treat some kind of ailment. And certainly that's going to be true for veterans. And so in that way, because they don't get any kind of subsidy, it gets pretty expensive if you're going to purchase it on the licensed market. And so these are areas that I definitely care about quite a bit. Compassionate care initiatives and projects, while also partnering with these nonprofit organizations that are out there doing the advocacy work, getting the product into the hands of the people who need it. These are the things that PAX as a company really tries to focus on.
That's pretty amazing because right now, like you said, if we can get legalized, people can get in their hands without having to risk their safety or legal status of trying to find it. So it's amazing what PAX is now touching the plant as well. So, but Lulu, let's talk about when people could touch the plant, but we couldn't really talk about it, like your experience in Oregon.
I had a very different type of experience because everyone in Oregon that I knew always talked about the plant. Like that's how we're just kind of raised. Even the DARE program, like I remember them coming to school and I was just really confused because I'm like, but that's not what is in my community. So, but I think definitely on the East Coast, once I got to New York, I started doing consulting there in 2006. Pretty much like no one talked about cannabis. New York is such a more, the West Coast is very liberal in a lot of ways. And then compared to the East Coast, it's just a lot more conservative. People very much care about their pedigree. I mean, at West Point, in that world too, everyone accepted drinking. So, a lot of it was drinking and a lot of it was pretty much cocaine. On the East Coast, no one really talked about cannabis. So, but it was really interesting when I was doing a consulting job for Bloomberg. And then when I started going into cannabis around 2016 with them, I just spoke very openly about it. And as I spoke more openly about it, because people trusted me that I was doing good work with the company, that automatically kind of opened up that conversation to be like, oh, well, I do it too. So I think just, being a good advocate in terms of just being, a positive person and making people feel comfortable because you're just speaking, openly about it,
right,
has been something that's been just really helpful in creating that, safe space to talk and share and build together.
All right. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff here. Okay.
Oh, just really quickly.
Oh,
if
yes,
anybody is a veteran, California Street Cannabis Co. in San Francisco, they do a compassion program, a veterans drop once a month or maybe twice a month now. So check them out. they very much believe in supporting veterans and, have a program with Weed for Warriors. So please check that out.
And there's social equity, right?
Yeah, and it's a social equity group. So Drakari, Donaldson, California Street Cannabis Company, they were the first in California to do a compassion program. First, it started with HIV patients, like low-income HIV and cancer patients from the Brownie Mary Club, and now they've expanded it to with veterans. So if you're in the Bay Area, please, reach out, check them out, and get your supply from them.
And if you're in Santa Cruz, check out Santa Cruz Veterans Alliance. All right, now we're going to get into the funny stuff. All right, Steven, I was number 14,000 when I joined Twitter. I actually got my name at Ophelia. In the early days, someone said, you should join this. And I said, why? They just join it. So I thought I typed in my name and I didn't realize, okay, I'm that early, I got my name. You don't know how many emo girls go after me to get my name. It's like they want it. But anyhow, so Steven, we went from West Point, Columbia, Twitter, then you made the jump to Weed Maps. All right. To me, I'm an Asian parent. If you were my son, I would have this altar with your big picture. And I would have fruit in front of it. I would have candles. I would have lights. And I would be bowing in front of that thing with like a hunk of incense every day. How, as every Asian American parent's dream, did you tell your parents that, hey, mom and dad, I'm out of the Army. I'm going to go into weed. How would you do that? How would they accept it?
It was definitely a conversation that took a little bit of time. Although I've been working on it really over the course of several years, only because my career path was, like I mentioned, a little bit winding. When I first got out of the Army, I think they were a little questioned the idea of getting out of the Army because they held that to some esteem. And then in management consulting, they understood that was a new path. It felt obviously very official, and so that was also good. But then I switched into finance. They also understood that, and at that point in time, it's interesting. But if I think of the Army as my first job, then I was probably an employee in the largest corporation in the world, and then over time, I just slowly ratcheted down the size of the company that I joined and worked for. When I joined the tech world, certainly they had some questions, and I had to explain Twitter to them, which is a comical conversation.
I do what I do.
And so, ironically, I had to also explain Twitter to other people in the world, just generally speaking, because a lot of people didn't understand it either. And I think they had their doubts, they had their concerns. They understood the finance companies I was working at. They didn't quite understand tech. When we IPO'd, they understood it a little bit better. But then I moved on and left and went to an even smaller company because it was just 10 of us when we first started. It was truly a startup. And so then they once again doubted or had questions about my decision making there, but it ended up working out as well. And so by the time I got to cannabis, they did have their doubts, but in the end, they did trust that I was making a choice that hopefully had some good long-term consequences there. I did try to explain to them this concept of coming out of prohibition, the fact that legalization was going to happen, that you wanted to be on the right side of that history, and so I think they understood that, and luckily for me, they trusted in that decision making, and as I like to joke, my mother had very sanguine and very succinct advice, which was just not go to jail. I have held that. I actually have fulfilled that so far. I have not gone to jail, so that's good.
It must be fun for you when you go back to family gatherings. It's like, here's my son. He's in cannabis. And all your cousins will go, oh, like this. It's like, it's a big difference. Like, my son, he's a consultant. And everyone, all right. So,
yeah, there is some stigma though still, right? Because I actually don't think my parents openly talk about the fact that I work in cannabis. Because although they're accepting, I don't think they believe that others will be accepting.
Ah, interesting. It's sort of like they're waiting for their mahjong club to say, everyone, let's put on some THC bomb, and then okay, it's ready
Yeah,
to talk.
I think that's right. Which is ironic actually, because I just realized recently, I took a picture of it too. They were watching a network that plays all kinds of satellite broadcasted Asian TV shows and network programming. And what I noticed was very heavy advertising around CBD products. And so I don't think we're far. I think it's one of these things that everyone is slowly accepting. They're just not openly talking about it.
That's true. Well, we denied 2,000 years of our plant medicine, and now we can bring it back since 1961. So we talked about your past. I'm going to talk a little bit about your present, maybe a little bit of your past. Lulu, how do you explain cannabis to New Yorkers? Because in California, we know what it is. Right. You don't have to explain to us an avocado or weed. But in New York, how I've noticed that they also have a different taste profiles there too. They like a lot of diesel, more heavier OG strains. So how do you explain cannabis to New Yorkers?
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly think like majority of New Yorkers kind of know cannabis. They've already, we've got the largest underground market in the world. So people just didn't talk much about it, and I think right now, you're right. There was a very distinct, New York sour diesel, really kind of, the folks that I know really like that burn. So it wasn't really good until it was the burn was there, and high THC. Right now, there's just like a lot of hype brands, like very specific, featured genetics from underground brands. So I would say, it's always been there for very specific people that loved weed. But now I think it's just education about the terpenes and the profiles, and it doesn't have to be amazing. Weed does not mean like a 35% THC. It means that it's something that works with your system. So I think the biggest challenge right now is, we have such a large population, but we also have such a large state with different types of demographics. So I think it's going to be really important for folks to really like branch out on education. I know our Office of Cannabis Management, I've been seeing these little kind of like PSAs on like buses and on the subway and stuff, but I think there needs to be much more of a larger push for that. And hopefully some of the stuff that we're doing at the Cannabis Media Council that you're also part of, we're going to be moving towards mainstream media, doing an entire industry PSA push. So wow. Excited about that.
It's good for PAX because in New York they love the possibly your products coming out.
Yeah, Steven, I was at a really cool after our event this past Saturday for On the Revel. We, there's a bunch of people in town wanted to meet, and got everybody at Stadium Goods because Styles P was doing a pop-up, and then all the folks just kind of converged on this little street on Howard in Soho. I think that's gonna be Weed Alley actually in New York. But anyway, I mentioned PAX, and everyone was like, down, like next time Steven comes into town, like let's meet up and talk. So really excited to have you guys come back and let us know when you're back in New York.
And it's such a beautiful product too. I mean, it's perfect for New York. The style, this everything that you're doing, and it's just gorgeous for PAX. So let's go to another question for you, Steven, because we're going to wrap it up soon. A little bit of the. I just want to ask you really quickly, what was your first experience like with cannabis when you first smoked it? What were you expecting, and what did you feel?
First experience was actually a friend who knew that I was having trouble sleeping, and I told him at the time. I mean, I really struggled with sleep. I still do, and during the bad times, I maybe got 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night. And so, you compound too many days of that, and it starts to have some wear and tear. And so, I started thinking, over time, I should probably do something about this because I learned that it turns out sleep is very good for you. And a friend of mine said, you really should try cannabis. I think it'll help quite a bit. And so he went ahead and got some flower, and he exposed me to it. I really didn't know what to expect. I actually was expecting mostly just the stereotypical precepts that people have around psychoactive effects of it. the truth of the matter is what my friend said was very true. I mean, we tried it and then I woke up the next day. And so, I think I don't remember much else other than that, which is kind of hilarious because he did say, you don't remember the conversation we had afterward? And I said, nope, I don't at all.
Good thing
But
you didn't have a Sharpie around. You woke up with a mustache.
yeah, exactly. And so luckily he's a good friend. But no, I mean, I'd say that at the time I because I didn't quite understand it, I didn't understand the benefits of it in a long-term perspective. Because also at the time, right, you didn't have license access to it on the market. This was actually in New York at the time. And so as I went outside of New York, I went to other markets. I didn't know how to go about getting it. I was ultimately fine with just kind of not using it as an option. At the same time, though, I knew the standard over-the-counter options were also not for me, right? I didn't want to take sleeping pills. I didn't want to take Vicks or NyQuil, right, to try and artificially create some way for me to sleep. None of that felt right or good for me. And then, along the way, when I joined the industry, I then truly began to understand the benefits that it could have for me and for people like me, and for certainly for veterans. And so then I started diving back into it. But my first experience really, again, was a cursory touch point that was good as an entry, so just as a frame of reference. But then it was a very long time before I truly got into it.
It's kind of strange. You kind of remember your first joint, but not really. On that, so for Lulu.
I remember my first joint.
Well, how old you were, but what was?
I was 13, and because it's just been around me for so long, I was just very curious about it. So I actually approached my aunt, who had a really large part of like influencing me as growing up. My parents worked all the time. She went and procured the weed for me, and then she said, "Look, if you're going to do it, I'm going to watch you and make sure you're going to be safe." So she gave me, and we smoked out of a bong. So it wasn't my first joint, it was my first bong rip. So I smoked two and we waited and I didn't feel anything. So, because sometimes, sometimes people smoke it for the first time or do anything.
You should ask her about your aunt's stash.
Yeah. Well, she went and procured from one of our family friends for me because I was too nervous to ask. And then she proceeded to give me 6 more bong hits.
Oh,
yep. So I definitely felt it. It was really, really interesting. I was a little bit nervous at first, but I think the best word to use whenever you take something new is just to surrender. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it was pretty cool. She sat with me, we talked about things, and then she took me to IHOP because I got really, really hungry, and she took me to IHOP, and I had the chocolate chip pancakes there. So I very much remember that. That was a very awesome night. And then through cannabis, like I also learned the first time when music became 3-dimensional. So she also played Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon for me.
Wow.
That's a really lovely mix with anything psychoactive.
We need your aunt.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, because I grew up in Canada, and so we used to call our weed in Ziploc bags Snap, Crackle, and Pop, because it was brick weed, but there was so many seeds in it, it would be popping all the way through.
I remember those days
like,
too.
Yeah, it was like pop rocks. You could pop all the way through. All that. Okay, last question for both of you. For you, the future of cannabis in New York.
Ooh. So one thing we're really proud of is that it's mandated that 50% of all licenses for operators in New York are going to be social equity. So what I really hope is that we're going to have a bunch of beautiful, different people, different backgrounds, different races, different religions, being able to have the same opportunity to create a business, create generational wealth. And also, I always say this, California has always been the innovator of everything, but it isn't until New York adopts something culturally that the whole world adopts it. So I hope that New York has learned from a lot of the first movers on what things to do. And I hope that New York also honors the diversity that we have in New York State, because, Washington's like 67% Caucasian. So we do have the diversity of people to be really able to create a equitable and opportunistic for everybody type of market.
It'll be fun to finally hear someone talking about cannabis in a Brooklyn accent. It'll be different. But last question for you, Steven. Okay, this is part of your future. Your career has been all these building blocks, but unexpected building blocks. Maybe the first part of it was kind of expected, but then you threw in something from left field. All right. So in about 5 years, if you were going to throw in something from left field, where haven't you gone yet?
Where haven't I gone? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is probably diving deeper into this world of, alternative like treatments and medicines that people can use. I think cannabis is obviously the beginning. There's a huge conversation around psilocybin at the moment, right? So that feels like a potentially obvious area to focus on. I certainly believe in what kind of benefits that plant can bring to people as well. And so I think there's that. But at the moment, for me, certainly just focusing on what we can do in this industry because it's so incredibly early, right? And so like what Lulu was talking about in New York, we should all be excited for what is about to happen out there. The launch is going to have its hiccups. It's going to have its road bumps, right? Like every market does. But this time around, I think people are armed with so much more information one more time. And so I think hopefully in partnership with the agencies, with the regulatory structure and with the government, we can come to an answer that ends up being best for everybody, especially, of course, the social equity folks and the communities that ultimately have suffered a price when it comes to this industry, this plant and its history. And so that's incredibly exciting. But it's also equally early in so many other markets, right? It doesn't really matter which one you go to. You can see that it is still very early. And so I would say in 5 years, we're still in the early innings of cannabis overall, because it's really more of a 20-year question of where do we end up. And so hopefully I'm still gainfully employed in cannabis and we're doing really great things at PAX. But I would say outside of that, certainly any of the other alternative treatments are certainly interesting.
Okay, this is seriously the lightning question. Don't think about it. All right. If we were going to name a personal strain with both of you, what would you call it? Lulu.
Pharaoh's Gold.
Steven.
Mr. Nice Guy OG.
Oh, I would actually call yours Leg Day OG. Don't forget Leg Day. So, I would like to thank both of you, Steven and Lulu, for being here. And I really appreciate you sharing your words and some laughter and some weird ass stuff that you put up with. And Steven, if you can't sleep and you don't have any weed, call me. I can bore you to sleep in about 20 minutes.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
And then I took the lint off with a tweezer. So, but I would like to thank both of you for coming on the Revel, PAX. But where can we find you and PAX? What is your URL?
So PAX.com, if you're looking for anything, whether it's the devices or the pods that you can find currently in California. And we have some very exciting things coming. We're moving pretty quickly, so keep an eye out for that. And we're also looking to expand it into other markets currently, very actively doing so. So if you're outside of California, just keep your ear to the ground. We'll be coming soon. And otherwise, you can find me on, big surprise, on Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
Steven E. Jung, Steven Y. Jung.
Oh, I would have called it at really hot Asian guy 420. So I'm gonna make that for you. Lulu, where can we find you and where can we find On the Revel?
So we have a website, On the Revel, REVEL.com, and then our Instagram. We will be hosting our first Brooklyn block party in September, so it's September 11th. So just sign up. We also have a Discord called Dope People channel. So just join us there for all of our resources and people that you should meet in your cannabis.
Well, thank you both. Thank you to the Bluntness. And this was Tea with Potluck with Ophelia Chong. I will see you all later. Thank you so much.